relationships matter. And it's really been fun, exciting, interesting, and a learning experience to see how the relationships that we've been able to build through this entire process, in my mind, is what's been able to keep this all together. There were many times we were ready to walk away, but I think the relationship that we've all had intact of building trust with each other to realize, like, despite the challenges, despite the nuances, whether it's valuation or networking capital or other aspects of any deal, can be challenging. Ultimately, believing and trusting in the relationship that's been built and the opportunity ahead is what's carried things through.
Okay, well, we are live on the Durable Small Business. We've got Kyle Pohl, we've got TC Krueger. Boys, welcome. Thanks for joining me in a conversation today.
Thanks for having us.
Glad to be here.
You guys represent an awesome Utah business, but also a very interesting story of how your paths intersected and kind of this second chapter for GetOutPass and Pogo Pass that we're going to talk about, and a merger and acquisition coming together and a new kind of bold path forward. So it's going to be fun to get that story. And then I want to change gears and talk about tactics and hear about kind of the day-to-day at GetOutPass. But maybe to kick us off, we'll go back eventually and get the full founding story. But Kyle, will you start by just kind of a brief introduction to yourself? And then TC, we'll kick it over to you.
Yeah, sure thing. My name's Kyle Pohl. I'm currently the CEO of GetOutPass and Pogo Pass. We don't have a combined name yet, but we're working on that. And live here in Utah. Lived in New York for about 13 years before coming back out to my home state of Utah. And glad to be here and glad to be working with TC on GetOutPass and Pogo.
Right on, TC.
Yeah, I'm TC Krueger. I'm kind of a serial entrepreneur, one of the original founders of GetOutPass. Shoot, what was it? Maybe 7-8 years ago. And yeah, we're excited we just kind of went through this transition with Kyle and put him in the leadership role here as the CEO of the combined entities. And we're super excited to go forward. Yeah, a little bit, I guess, about the founding story. I had a good friend of mine had this idea about the original idea was kind of Netflix for getting out of the house and doing stuff rather than sitting in front of the TV and watching, movies or television or whatever. And I thought it was kind of a cool idea, kind of the anti-Netflix. And kind of we thought through some scenarios. We looked in the market. There was a few companies that seemed like they were doing something sort of in that realm, but nobody was doing it nationwide. There wasn't, one main provider of a service like that. And so we decided to just kind of test the waters. And I said, hey, here in Utah, a friend of mine at the time owned Cowabunga Bay in Draper. And I said, let me give him a call. That would be a cool venue to have on there as kind of one of the kickoff. That's kind of a big, water park here. Gave them a call. We sat down with them and they sort of gave us if you can actually make this come to fruition, we'll definitely join and jump on and be part of it. And then we started.
What would they be part of? Maybe just take a step back, TC, and what is GetOutPass for maybe those who aren't familiar with the concept of an experiential Netflix alternative?
Yeah. So essentially it's an aggregator of entertainment venues, right? So bowling alleys and family fun centers and, amusement parks, water parks, sports teams, kind of all these different things that you can go out and do with your family, do with your friends. We took that and kind of put it all together as pay one price and get access to do all these things in varying degrees, right? Once a year you can do something, some things are weekly, some things are, once a month you can go do it. And so we just kind of put together this aggregate pass that you could buy, kind of similar, I would say, to the Icon Pass or one of the ski passes where you can buy one thing and visit a whole bunch of different places, right?
Right, which but they weren't as popular back then. So what was the founding insight? Why, you wanted to...
It really was like being the Netflix of entertainment, of family entertainment. The other thing that was going on at the time that was really hot, I don't know if you remember Movie Pass.
Yeah.
It was for 1 or 2 years, it was going gangbusters and people were paying, whatever it was, $10 a month, all unlimited movies. So kind of that model was sort of going on or being tested at the time. Obviously Movie Pass, crashed and burned, but luckily our model's a little bit more sustainable than that. And so it was just kind of this flexion point of these aggregator things are happening in a bunch of different industries. Why not in the thing that I think makes the most difference for a a person and their family is getting out and having fun experiences rather than going to another movie or watching another show on TV or whatever. So yeah, so that was kind of the impetus of where we wanted to take it.
And so you had this vision,
Yep.
and you then had this need to go build a two-sided marketplace, right?
Yeah.
Of
Yeah.
getting vendors on board that were exciting, that people would be interested in paying a single price to go access all these venues. I would imagine it wasn't easy, and it sounds like Cowabunga Bay played an important role early on. But just maybe rewind the tapes back to years 1 and 2. How do you get a venture like this off the ground? What did it take?
Yeah, it was tough. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That's the hard part is putting the vendors together with the customers and making something that works for both. We learned very quickly when we launched the pass, we were kind of going to these venues and these vendors and asking them, what would you be willing to do to put on the pass? And a lot of them were excited about it. And some of them were a little overexcited, or maybe it was the manager, but they would say, hey, we'll do a free hour of jumping at the trampoline park once a week, and things like that were just totally not sustainable to give away that much value. But it made our pass really valuable to the customers. So when we launched really well. It was almost like our biggest complaint was this is too good to be true. This is like $5,000 worth of value if I use it all for like $100.
What were you charging at the time? Like year one, do you remember like your
I
opening price points
Yeah,
and the profit
I think we were like,
they
I think
got?
$80. It was like seventy
You
nine
bet.
ninety nine or something like that. And that included, a free 1 day ticket to Lagoon, right? Which was at the time probably 65 or $70 just by itself. And then Cowabunga Bay and some of these other things. And then some of these places that you got free weekly entrance, and some of them were like every Tuesday you could come use it. And anyway, yeah, we did the math, and it was, if you used everything on there, which would be almost impossible to do, you would have gotten $5,000 plus of value for $79. And so it was just this incredible value. We launched right around Mother's Day. So it was kind of this cool sale that we did with a lot of influencer marketing about like, hey, get this for your moms, for the family, so you can go and enjoy, some time together. And it launched really, really well. And we very, very quickly found out that it wasn't necessarily the best thing for the venues when we had venues start calling us and saying, hey, we're getting flooded with these people and they're just coming in for free. Like, what's going on? We're like, that was what you signed up for. You gave us that thing that you put on the pass. So we quickly, the business became, how do we like adjust what's on the pass to make it beneficial for venues as well as customers, and put those two things together at the same time. And that's really become the secret sauce of the business, is like putting together deals that we can show to venues that like, hey, this is going to drive traffic to your venue, but also
Right.
give you new opportunity from these people. Like, we're essentially a marketing arm for these venues, that we're going to bring that first time customer, the trial, the person through the door, and they have revenue opportunities from there. And then for the customers, it's still a fantastic deal. I don't know what it is now, but maybe it's like $3,000 worth of value, for $100. So we've kind of made those two things more in line. And that was really the challenge of this business, is being sort of the middleman, making it work for both parties and providing that value, right? Like the venues in the beginning are like, you don't have any customers. What are you bringing me? And
Right.
the customers in the beginning, if you don't have any venues or good partnerships and good offers, like, what are you offering me to buy?
So
So,
you put that together and you launched it around Mother's Day, you said, and then you said like it launched really successfully. Do you remember some numbers of the early years? Like what does that look like? What happened?
man, I don't remember exactly, but I want to say like I'm sitting there at church, right? And Mother's Day is like going off, and I'm seeing all the numbers, and a guy in my ward was working for us at the time, and his wife came up and he's like, have you seen the sales? And I can't remember exactly, but I think that first sale, that first like Mother's Day sale, I want to say we did like $100,000 in revenue, which was kind of amazing for just like kicking it right out of the gate.
I mean, that's thousands and thousands of customers. And you launched initially just in Utah, of course, right here in our backyard. Though that's where all the venues were. You weren't a multi-state operation like you are today. And what were the first few years like growing out GetOutPass?
It was crazy. It was kind of a rocket ship right out of the gate, and then it was managing those relationships, right? And that was kind of the biggest challenge that we had, was really managing those venue partners. We had a lot drop off that just kind of had this immediate bad taste in their mouth, that were like, why did I do this? This was crazy. We're out. And then we had a lot that were like, it's great. A lot of people are coming through the door, but how do we make it better?
In the dials.
Yeah, so we really, I mean, that was kind of one of the first roles that we really focused on, was like a venue relations specialist. That was their entire job, was just to like reach out to the venues and make sure what was working, what was not working. How can we adjust? How can we make this better for your venue? And we really developed a model that like each venue type, like a climbing gym, a trampoline park, like a bowling alley, each one kind of has a different model of how they go to gain customers. And so we said, how do we play into that? And what's kind of an offering that we can provide for your specific venue? Now it's great when we go across the country. Kyle knows when we go into a new market, we can go into those type of venues and say, hey, we've done this, dozens of times. Your specific venue type, this is what works really, really well. And put them on the pass and get it going. So it's a much simpler process now that we've figured out kind of that secret sauce of what works for each type of venue and what they're looking to do.
Kyle, I want to get you in eventually, but I also like before we do, I want to hear a little bit more TC from you on just those first early years because yeah, I mean everyone who has built a company knows things are messy in the first year or two and things are hard and there's cash flow crises and you have vendors that are upset that you're sending them too much traffic and then maybe on the flip side vendors who aren't getting any traffic and you're building a team and so if we fast forward today, I don't want to cut to the chase, but today it's a $30 million business. You started $100,000 Mother's Day weekend. What were those first few years like in terms of revenue growth, team growth, and just some of the early bumps and hiccups?
And you
Yeah,
should
I mean, it
get
was
into
a
COVID
startup
too.
through and through. It was exciting. It was fun. We were just hitting the pavement and really getting out and just knocking doors with these venues, trying to get people on board, trying to get these companies on board. And that was exciting, right? That was a really exciting time to kind of see that grow. And we didn't really know what to expect. Like, how was the pass going to sell? And what we found is that we have kind of these seasonal times of year where, when school's getting out for the summer, parents are really thinking about what are they going to do with their kids all summer while they're not in school, right? So there's that top of mind. What are we going to do? Oh, this pass is available, and I've heard about it from a friend. And then you have like holiday sales and gifting, and so we kind of developed, some other aspects to the business. So we were just kind of developing and testing and trying different things, and kind of eventually over those first 2 years, I would say, kind of got a model that really worked. Of like, these are the times that we really sell well and we hit it really hard, and our marketing dollars really go the distance for us. And these are the times of year where in February, nobody's really thinking about like, let's go out to a water park, right? So we figuring all that out was really fun, and we were just iterating and trying new things and coming up with our redemption process of like how they use it at the venue to make it really super simple for the venues. Because if if they come in and it's this complicated process of like, hey, I'm with GetOutPass, it's not good for the customer, it's not good for the venue, this
Right.
complicated structure. So we had to come up with a really seamless way using technology and an app that they could just show and redeem it. And so that was kind of fun to really work with a development team. We hired an outsourced development team that we worked with, and had a lot of late nights just testing and iterating. And I'm not a software guy at all, so I'm just kind of like making screen recordings and videos of like, this isn't working for me and I have no clue how to fix this, but do this. And speaking two different languages, just figuring that out, right? I mean, my main business is restaurants, so coming from that world, like trying to develop an app and the software and this redemption process was a fun but totally new experience for me. So
Love it. All right. So,
yeah.
Kyle, you're living a parallel life elsewhere, not involved in Get Out Pass. Maybe tell us a little bit about your background, what you were doing prior to Get Out Pass, and then how you ultimately uncovered this opportunity.
Yeah, happy to. By the way, at some point, like those first 2 years were wild. You've got to tell what happened during COVID because you got to remember, like everything that was happening was going great, and then all of a
In
sudden,
person
everything
experience
shut down.
based.
Right?
Right.
Should we hit that right now? I'd love to have you tell about that because
You
that
see, will
that
you
was
tell that story?
wild.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, COVID hit and it was like we were basically the worst industry you could possibly be in. I mean, I own restaurants and everybody thought restaurants took a major hit, which we did for a few weeks there, but then people started realizing like support your local restaurant. And we didn't shut down. It was an essential business, but going to a water park, going to the trampoline park, going to the bowling alley is not considered an essential business. And so those were really shut down. And some of the markets at that point in time, we had grown into a few different markets: Colorado, Washington, Oregon. We had established passes in some of these markets. And luckily for us, our main market where the bulk of our pass sales were was Utah. And Utah had, was limited in the effect of COVID. Like a lot of things stayed open. Some of the
Bit of the
water
Wild
parks,
West out here.
yeah, just limited capacity and things like that. But some of those states I just mentioned, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, they
Oh,
weren't so
that.
friendly.
Well, help me
And
understand though. I would imagine you are somewhat protected in the sense that people are buying an annual pass and you had a lot of customers who had already bought an annual pass. So you're protected more than like the actual venues themselves who are relying on daily sales to kind of continue to cover their overhead. Were you getting an onslaught of like refund requests because they couldn't
oh
go to
yeah.
the parks? And like, help me understand why you were impacted the way that you were.
Yeah, I mean, we had to make a difficult decision that kind of took some long-term vision, and because we knew we were going to get flooded with refund requests of people that
Yeah.
bought and said, I can't use it. And so we came up with a solution that we're going to kind of have like a no questions asked refund policy, or at least a credit that people could get. So we'd first offer a credit that, or like, hey, we'll put your pass on pause. And when it comes back, you can unpause it, whenever you want. And so we tried to make it really easy for the customer to feel comfortable that they weren't just going to waste a year, or, for a family of six, they're going to waste, $500. And so we made a decision to not say, hey, you paid us the money and sorry, this is an extenuating circumstance and we can't refund it. We made a decision to for sure credit anyone so that they could extend their pass, and when things come back they could go, or refund people that preferred just to have a refund. I mean, we felt like that kind of built some goodwill in the customer base, that because we knew once we come out of COVID, like a lot of people are going to ask like how, I mean, a big part of the business, big part of the marketing strategy is word of mouth. And we want that word of mouth to be positive with our customers. And so we knew that kind of holding a line of like, hey, if we refund all this money, it's not going to be good for us, would not bode well, in the future. So we really made a
With
decision to.
hindsight, that doesn't sound as bold as I imagine it felt at the time.
It was
What
stressful at the time, right? Like you're like,
what
okay,
gave you the
sales have
conviction that
basically
was the
come
right
to a
call?
halt, and now we got to give money back. That was a tough decision, but ultimately, like it was definitely the best decision, and I think it really propelled us as we kind of came out of COVID. And miraculously, because of being in Utah and enough venues staying open, I remember at the time, like Lagoon never closed; they just had limited
Hmm.
capacity. Seven Peaks Water Park, which is now Splash Summit, they never closed; they just had limited capacity. So we were fortunate that in Utah, a lot of the venues stayed open and they were able to function in some way or another. And so we did reduce our customer count for sure, and we refunded a lot of people. But we actually, we didn't make a profit that year, I wouldn't say, but we basically were able to sustain and break even because of Utah. In the other markets, Washington, Oregon, Colorado, it was basically everything shut down, refund everybody's money. And if Utah was like that, we would have been in a world of hurt. But fortunately for us, Utah wasn't was an easier COVID place to be.
Wow, what a
Yeah,
time! I'll bet that was nerve wracking at the
it
time,
was
Kyle.
crazy.
I'm glad you called that story out.
Hopefully,
Kyle,
Kyle never has to go through something like that.
yeah, geez, touch wood that was truly a black swan event. Okay, it's time to take a quick break for two messages. First, if you only know us through this podcast, it might help to know about Durable itself. We are Utah's private community for business owners, part of Dakota Group. Membership is free, events, online communities, and the Durable Dispatch newsletter. But the deepest level of engagement comes through our curated, invite-only peer groups. Most owners face the hardest calls alone, and peer groups change that. Small, hand-picked circles of CEOs and operators who have been in the trenches for real conversations, straight answers, and accountability that sticks. Here's what it looks like. Groups of 8 to 10 owners who meet monthly. You bring your toughest challenges, give and receive advice, and leave with clarity and next steps you'll actually act on. If you want to learn more, request an invite at builddurable.co. Our second message is about Durable's sister company, Durable Finance. Durable Finance was built by operators for operators because we know what it's like to sit in your chair. Think of us as your partner in all things numbers, monthly bookkeeping, cash flow management, capital advisory, and fractional CFO support. Clear reporting, gap compliance, and no jargon. Just the clarity that every business owner deserves without paying CFO level prices. And here's what you get. Books closed on time every month, a monthly financial board meeting, a forward-looking cash forecast, KPI dashboards that actually make sense, and a finance team you enjoy working with. Plans start at $400 a month. Move to Durable Finance. Know your numbers. Grow your business. Those are our two messages for today. Thanks for listening, and now back to the program. Kyle, bring us up to speed on your background and kind of again what brought you to GetOutPass.
Yeah, so while all this was going on, then I was in New York City and I got out there, did finance for several years, and then moved over and worked for LinkedIn. And so while they were starting the business, I was running a business over at LinkedIn. And we, at the time, I was there about 9 years at LinkedIn. The last 5 years, we built the LinkedIn learning business, which came from an acquisition of lynda.com, which was an online learning platform. We sold that to companies and called it LinkedIn Learning. And we saw tremendous growth there. And I learned a ton from leading a large organization, from managing sales teams, from helping figure out how to build a new platform and a new business, and also a merger, right? Like or an acquisition. Like we had acquired lynda.com and had to merge that with our LinkedIn business. And we were coming in as the the new show in town that was basically taking over this operation, but it was a great business that already existed. And we had big plans for it. But at the same time, there was a team, there was a product, there were customers, there were all these things that we didn't want to disrupt. And so much of what I learned during that experience, I've been using these first 3 months. But coming out of LinkedIn, it was actually interesting. During COVID, there was a company that had come and talked to me because of a former colleague at LinkedIn who had left and gone to a company called GymPass. And that may sound familiar or similar to Pogo Pass and GetOutPass. But the idea of GymPass was basically they were an aggregator of gym studios and well-being apps. And at the time, it wasn't well-being apps, but they had contacted me prior to COVID. And one of the things I had told them, like, it wasn't the right time for me to move. They wanted me to move, but they also needed some help in launching their US market because they were really big in Brazil. They had launched and done well in Europe, but they hadn't really gained traction in the US market. So they were kind of looking for someone to come run that US business. And I said no a few times. But one of the things I told them was like, hey, you should think about a hybrid model where you're doing both online fitness and well-being as well as the actual gyms. It's like, yes, it's on the radar. We're thinking about it, but not right now. We're focused on the in-person gyms. Well, that was probably like, you know, November, December of 2019, right?
Famous words.
And a few months later, COVID hits, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so glad I didn't go join that gym company. I bet you they went out of business." And I didn't hear from them for a while. They're obviously in like disarray. They're figuring out what to do. And it turns out what they did is they did exactly what I told them they should do, but it was out of necessity, right? They went to a hybrid model. They signed all these apps, became a hybrid player, and they knew at some point the gyms would open. But for the time being, they were online fitness only. And they came back to me probably like, probably October and said, "Hey, we want to talk again." I legitimately thought that they were coming looking for a job. I thought, you know what? I bet you that went out of business and that they're back saying, "Hey, you got anything at LinkedIn? We enjoy working with you. Like maybe you've got a job for us." But no, they came back and said, "Look, we're not only surviving, we're thriving, we're growing, and you know we've embraced this hybrid model, but but we need someone to help us build the US business." And when I realized that they had gone through COVID and basically all gyms shutting down and they were still growing, I was like, this is a great business. And I made the leap. I left LinkedIn after 9 years there and I went and ran their US business. So basically, this is the US business of GymPass, which is this network of 15,000 gym studios and fitness apps, as well as we primarily sold it to businesses. So businesses would provide it to their employees as a benefit. And I ran that business for 3 years. We grew it from I think we were $10 million to around $100 million when I left. So we had
No
phenomenal,
kidding. What a rocket ship.
yeah, really great experience and learned a ton going through that process. But I'd learned about the merger, kind of an acquisition and bringing a company together at LinkedIn. Now learn about this kind of very niche kind of network aggregator business at GymPass, which by the way, LinkedIn is a network business. Like it's a network of professionals. Before that, it worked at American Express, which is a network of cardholders. And now I was at this network of, gyms and I decided to leave. I decided to go buy a business. And, Gym Pass was amazing. It was growing, but I just had always wanted to do something more entrepreneurial and felt like this was my moment. And now was the chance.
Why
And
wasn't that opportunity? You were running the company. Why wasn't that scratching the entrepreneurial itch? What were you looking for personally?
well, I need to be clear. I wasn't running a company. I was running the US part of the business. And the biggest business was in Brazil. And while we were a $100 million business in the US, we were a $700 million business globally. And this is a $3
Wild.
billion business, right? It's the large business. I was running a portion of it. Full transparency, I had a leader that just came in that wasn't there when I started. It was challenging. And so I'm really grateful to her because of the challenges that we had. Like that caused me to realize this could happen anywhere, right? I could go anywhere and have that situation. I've always wanted to do this. Now's the time. And so
So
that
you
was,
wanted more control over your destiny. You wanted to kind of continue the good times that were adjusting, and you were ready to go chart your own entrepreneurial course.
yep.
So what were you thinking at the time? You wanted to go buy a business? That it was as simple as that?
That was the plan. It could have been anything. And, I did like Walker Dybel's course, like the acquisition lab. I read everything there was to read out there. I listened to, hundreds of podcasts, particularly Will Smith's Acquiring Minds. Like I was all in on this and going full speed. And I looked at, hundreds of businesses, looked closely at dozens of businesses. And interestingly enough, someone at the BYU ETA conference, we were at a jazz game and they introduced me to TC saying, "Hey, not because Get Out Pass was for sale, but because it's like, hey, Gym Pass kind of sounds like Get Out Pass. You guys should meet."
I
And
was there that night. There must have been something in the water.
it was remarkable. And yeah, we started chatting and TC's asking me all these questions about how we build Gym Pass. Because I don't think you were aware of Gym Pass and like how big it was and kind of what it
Yeah,
was.
TC, what do you recall of that conversation?
I just recall thinking, wow, that is crazy that I met someone finally that's kind of in the same space or a similar type space, because it is such a unique niche space that there's not really a category that you would say, oh, I'm in this business, right? And so meeting someone like Kyle that was like, oh, you did something similar. Like I know there's been a couple of startups here and there. There was one in Utah called, I think, Play Pass or something. And we'd talked to them briefly. I don't think they're around anymore. That was kind of in the gym space. And so I was just really curious about like, how are you guys selling gym passes and how are you getting into markets? And their go to market strategy was totally different than ours, very, with the B2B to C model, whereas we were just
Yeah.
B2C. And so I was very curious about that. And we'd always thought about how could we do kind of a B2B to C model along with our B2C? And so just peppering Kyle with questions. And I think, by the end of the night, I kind of mentioned like, hey, you've got this experience and you're looking for a business to buy. And at the time, we were in a little bit of a situation. It was myself and two other partners, and there was a little bit of misalignment at the time with what each partner kind of wanted. And, one really wanted to sell and the other wanted to maybe go and do something else and with his time. And I was kind of on the fence. Like, I think there's something here, but we've kind of plateaued in what we're doing. And so anyway, I just kind of threw it out there to Kyle as like, hey, I know you're looking for a business to buy and you've kind of got experience in this market. Like we might be open to selling. I don't know, and that sort of just blossomed like this long conversation that we started having about like, is there something here that could work? So
Kyle, this is such an interesting story from your perspective of when you're out searching to buy a business, you just never know where a lead is going to come from, right? And you were how far into your search at this time? Maybe give us a snapshot of what your search had been like to date.
Yeah, I was only a couple of months in and I had just left my job officially. So I was kind of doing search towards the end of, my job, but it was hard. It was a busy job, right? Like I had a lot of responsibilities, working 50, 60 hours a week. And so I didn't have a lot of time to search. But my last day was March 1st. And I think it was like mid-March. So it was like 2 weeks later that I met TC. And so I'd been looking at things. I actually got pretty close on a construction equipment rental business to putting in an LOI. But that's when I realized, like, hey, if I put in this LOI, like, there's no way I can do due diligence. I just don't have time to do it. So either I buy a crappy company with red flags that I didn't expose in diligence, or I walk away at the end and waste everyone's time. Like, neither one of those were acceptable to me. So that's when I realized I've got to go in full time. And so I was literally like 2 weeks into my full time search when I met TC. And I'll never forget the moment when he said that because literally we talked for a half an hour. They kicked us out of the jazz game. It was like, hey, you guys got to get out of here. Kind of walking the parking lot. And he said that to me, and I was like, wait, you might be for sale? Like I just thought this was an entrepreneur looking for advice and asking a bunch of questions because I happened to know a fair bit about his business. And when he said that, it was just like this light from above. I was like, what? For sale? Like all these other companies I've been looking at, I knew nothing about. Like I had never driven a Bobcat in my life, but here I was looking to buy a construction equipment rental business. But here was something that I had like deep subject matter expertise in. I also was passionate about it. Like I was a customer, right? Like I had a pass for my family. I've got 5 kids. And here's something that like is doing good in the world. It's getting people out from behind the screens. It's, creating these memories with families. And so everything you said about the business, I was like, in my mind, I was kind of like, what a cool business, man. Like, I was kind of jealous. I was like, I can't believe you get to run such an amazing business. And somebody was like, yeah, like I remember something along the lines of like, hey, we're not up for sale, but we might be open to it if we find the right person to run it. And I think we might have just found the right person. I was like, wait, what? And so,
All right, so
so
I want to pause because this all sounds too good to be true. And for a period of time, it kind of was, right?
yeah.
Like, you see, you had a little bit of a messy kind of misalignment of, are we for sale? Are we not for sale? What was going through your head at the time, and what happened following this conversation?
Yeah, so at the time we'd have some conversations about it. Our one main competitor in the space that was kind of growing into different markets that kind of similar to what we were doing was Pogo Pass. And we had, one or two conversations with them very briefly about like, hey, is there something here where maybe a merger or we buy you, you buy us is even on the table? And that seemed like it was just shut down. And so that didn't go anywhere at all.
Let me interrupt
And
you. Can you give me a snapshot of GetOutPass today and kind of size, or sorry, not today, at the time, size? You mentioned like maybe the business had plateaued a little bit. Let's just take 30 seconds and talk about the state of the business at the time of this conversation.
the time of this conversation, boy, that was only what? 9 months ago or something, maybe. So I think we were, we had projections last year of doing, Kyle, you know the numbers better than me. You've been digging into it for the last little bit, but for probably 10 million plus last
Yeah,
year was kind of what we were
2023
looking
was
at
a little
sales
bit
wise.
over
Yeah.
10 million in 2023. And then 2024, they were projected, I mean, it ended up being around 14. And so they were growing, and but at the same time, like I think some of the wind, and TC can tell more about this, but the wind had kind of been taken out of the sail. I think it was a passion early on of like, let's go, let's do everything. And there was some other things that came in, some distractions, some other ideas, and the focus wasn't on like the opportunity at hand, which is this is an amazing business that we can grow to be a tremendous business.
Yeah, we had made a couple of poor decisions. One was a merger with a company that had nothing to do with what we were doing that we thought would bring some technical expertise that we didn't have and that we could bring some sales because that was we were heavy, sales organization that we could bring to this other company. And so we kind of went through a merger and that ended up ultimately just costing us a lot of headache and a lot of money to kind of end up sort of unwinding that. And so we were kind of coming out of this period of just sort of like, what are we doing? Where are we going? Like, what do we get distracted with? What's like, where are we going to go next? We had the CEO at the time, was a little bit burnt out on what we were doing and some of these, kind of things that we had been through. And so there was just sort of this like, we just felt like we were kind of trudging along, even though we were growing, from a revenue standpoint. I will say our profitability, I don't think was certainly not growing at the same rate. And so we were kind of losing touch with like what made us really thrive in the
The
beginning.
fundamentals.
Yeah, the very fundamentals of the business. And yeah, so it was just we were kind of in this weird space. And on top of that, we had a couple conversations because that competitor Pogo Pass, they actually did end up selling to a company called Gray Bull Stewardship. And we knew they were selling. This was like November, December 2023. And we knew they were selling, but we didn't know who to. And so there was some of that like, what's going to happen after that? Are they going to go bonkers? Are they selling to somebody that's just going to run it into the ground? We didn't know. We thought for sure who they were selling to and their due diligence would reach out to us as like kind of the main competitor. And we
Right.
were large from a revenue perspective. We were a much larger company. And so for sure we figured this company would reach out and they never did. And almost immediately after they closed the sale with Pogo Pass, then they reached out to us and said, hey, we're the new owners of this company. We're in your space. Would just like to get to know you and open up a conversation. And one of the first things I said to them is like, finally, I thought you guys would reach out to us in your due diligence. And, the guy over there at Great Bull Stewardship said, yeah, we probably should have done that, huh? and,
It's a
and I was like,
small
yeah,
world, to your point. It's not
we would have
your
maybe had some interest of like getting in on the deal or figuring something out. So then from then on, they started pursuing us and they started saying, hey, well, let's figure, we would love to buy you guys too and kind of put these together or figure out some way. And so we kind of pursued that. But ultimately at that time, we felt like that was going to be really complicated with, sometimes you have like the original founders of GetOutPass and you had the original founders of Pogo Pass. And there was a little bit of like, you know, animosity. I never,
natural. Yeah, it's
nothing,
Pogo Pass. You
nothing,
guys can
nothing
compete
major, but
here.
we just felt like that's never going to happen. Like it's not going to get done,
Yeah.
So anyway, when I met Kyle, it was sort of top of mind of like we've been sort of playing around with selling, but haven't listed it, right? We talked to a couple brokers about like if we did, what could we go to market for, and just kind of some really generic conversations. So when I talked to Kyle, it was just sort of there. It was like, well, we haven't really tested the waters, but we'd be open to it. And so, yeah, from there, Kyle, I said, look, the biggest issue that we had at the time was, if our CEO was wanting to depart with the sale, how does that work, right? Like, who's going to come in and run the business? Like, what's going to be, how's it going to move forward? And that's a challenge when you go to market and a buyer comes in and says, okay, this isn't like some massive business. It's a 10 to 14, $15 million a year business. You pull the CEO out. What do we have? So that was a concern. So when Kyle came to the table, it was like he's going to run the company, put a deal together to buy it. That was really attractive. And getting to know Kyle over the next few months after that, I was of the mindset of like, this is the path forward, especially if I'm going to put any of my, equity towards this. If I'm going to roll my equity, I want to go this direction because I know we got the guy with the experience. Like I'm never going to find somebody in this type of a market or this type of a category of business with the experience that Kyle has with Gym Pass and LinkedIn that I'm going to feel comfortable rolling my equity. So that just made a lot of sense. And we just went down that path with Kyle of like, Kyle, make this happen. Let's go.
Make
And
what happen? You were like, Kyle, what was going through your mind? Your mind was essentially, can we bring these two companies together, merge them, and can I help facilitate this
not
new?
at that time, right? When we first started talking, that wasn't on the table.
Yeah. Yeah. So initially, then the thought was, I'm just going to buy GetOutPass. Right. And we were looking at different structures. I think all along, then TC had indicated, like, I want to roll equity, like, I want to be a part of this. And so we kind of knew that and figured we'd probably buy out the other two partners. But I was talking to investors and I probably talked to 30 to 40, maybe even more different investors and investment groups to put together a deal to make this happen. And we were making great progress along that road. Like I had some really strong investors lined up. I had one group in particular that had experience in the family entertainment space. They were really stoked about the deal, really wanted to be a part of it. And then a few others that, wanted to put in some capital. I also got a lot of no's, right? There were a lot of people, like there weren't very many people who saw it, saw my experience, the alignment with the business, saw what the business was doing. Like once I laid it out, then almost everyone was interested. But ultimately there were a number of reasons that a few people pulled out. So that was a tough go. Like I was out raising capital and raising capital for a company that wasn't mine that we were trying to put together a deal for. I learned a ton through that process and also learned a ton about the business because every one of these investment groups would ask me thousands of questions that I'd have to figure out on my own. So they helped me figure out the diligence. So by the time we actually got it under LOI and went into diligence, like I already knew so much about the business that I was kind of leading the diligence with Grable when they ended up coming in. Like, oh yeah, this is what it is. Here's all the stuff I pulled together, and so learned a ton about it. But yeah, initially it was just me acquiring. I knew about Pogo Pass, but it was like, hey, we're going to beat these guys. Like we've got a better road, we've got more markets, we've got resources. We've also got a plan and an operator where they kind of had the three guys who were running their business, were the owners, but had sold and weren't all in it. So I was like, yeah, we're going to beat these guys. And then what happened is we finally got under LOI. And by the way, like that was a journey getting under LOI. Like there was a lot of curves in the road and bumps and the deal died several times before I got under LOI myself with just TC and the other two partners. But when we finally got it under LOI, it was just for me to go acquire it and bring some investors along to make the deal happen. And then as we went through that process, we hit some more bumps through the diligence process that indicated like, okay, things are going to be different than what we originally set out in terms of the LOI. And that's when TC kind of said like, hey, we should probably talk to Grable. Like I knew who Grable was. I knew who Pogo was. I knew that they were kind of bidding against me, but it was like, you know what? They really want to be a part of this business. There's definite synergies here. We should at least broker a conversation between you and this guy Mason over at Grable, who's their founder, just to see if there might be something there. And that's when everything finally changed in terms of like considering bringing the two together and starting to think about, wow, could we bring these two together, create basically the only company in the nation that's doing a subscription based family entertainment pass at any kind of scale and not have to trip over each other and compete with each other and drive the price up for certain venues because we both wanted the same venue. Like if we were just one, that could be a lot better. And that's how that got started. But it took, I mean, we met in March. We didn't meet with Grable until I think it was probably August when that happened. So all that time we had been just thinking about me acquiring the business with investors. It wasn't until August that we're like, all right, maybe we should bring Pogo into the mix here.
So how did that conversation go? What were their interests, and was that a natural fit out of the gates, or did it take several conversations to find alignment?
Yeah, they were while I was talking to Kyle and we were kind of negotiating LOI, I think that was part of what took so long is that Grable was continuing to kind of pursue us and just reaching out like, hey, we'd still love to do something here. This makes so much sense. And so for me at the time, right, we were in a good position as a seller of like we have two really strong buyers that I could see us doing a deal with either one, right? Our main competitor in the space, we could merge and this private equity company could come in and buy us, or Kyle's the guy I think to run it. And so I preferred Kyle and his putting some capital together and going with him. And that was a good spot to be in where you kind of had both these sides that, it was driving the price up and the value up a little bit. And so when it started getting a little rocky with the investors on Kyle's side, and just to be a little bit more frank about it, like we were running our financials on kind of a cash based accounting and had never really gone through the process of converting that to accrual. And in this business, it's very like
That
cash
is
flow
wild to
heavy.
me.
Yeah. So
Both because of your size, but because you're you're earning your revenue over a 12-month period after you receive cash. I mean, you're one of those businesses where the difference between cash basis and accrual basis isn't
it's
small.
very different. It's very different. Yeah. So when we kind of dove into that, that was kind of where they started really peeking under the hood and said, well, this is a slightly different business than we kind of thought we were getting into. So that's where the conversation kind of shifted. So we were under LOI, and then it was sort of like, ooh, there's going to be, some net working capital adjustments here that you guys are going to love. And so we started kind of having those conversations, and that's where it just, I at the time I was terrified, right? I had these two buyers. They're kind of somewhat competing against each other. And I all along had this idea of like the perfect scenario would be Gray Bull and Pogo Pass, the merger that we could do there, and Kyle, and putting those together. But my fear was I have two buyers right now. If I put them together, now it's one buyer. And if it doesn't work, now I have no
Right.
buyers.
Right.
So
High risk, high
that was a
reward.
big, yeah, that was a big fear there of like, this could work perfectly or it could blow the whole thing up. Right. But ultimately, it just felt like that was kind of the right way to go. Gray Bull was pursuing us enough, and they gave us a lot of confidence. We kind of let them under the hood a little bit of like, hey, this is what we're dealing with on this side is, kind of getting an understanding for these investors around cash basis and accrual basis of how this business works and all that kind of stuff. And Gray Bull was like, well, we just went through that, right? Like they went through almost that exact same thing with Pogo Pass because it was very similar. They're a very similar structure. And so like we understand that we're going to come in and I felt very confident, and they made me feel very confident that if you open this up to us, we will get the deal done. Like there's not gonna be some big surprise. We just went through it. We're gonna get a deal done. So then we set up a meeting. Mason, Kyle, and I sat down at a restaurant right there in Traverse Mountain there, Thanksgiving Point area, and just kind of had like an introduction of like, how could this look? How could this work? And we sort of found out right there that Gray Bull with Pogo Pass, they had hired a CEO to come in and run that business, and it wasn't going super well. And so for them,
Interesting.
that was like, okay, you have a CEO that fits better. That works really well for us too. So it just
It's
ended up
so
making
interesting. It
sense.
sounds both meant to be, but it also sounds like you had to just thread the needle through a million things for this to come together.
Yep, yep, and that's why
Ultimately,
it took so long.
the deal gets done, but maybe Kyle, will you give like a little bit of a perspective from your side? Because you and I know each other. I remember when you were kind of left on the doorstep a couple times, and you were on the roller coaster of this. Maybe just a minute or so from your perspective on this, and then with the deal being done, I want to talk about Get Out Pass today and kind of the go forward plan ahead.
Yeah, sure thing. I mean, it is a roller coaster. This business acquisition world, especially when you've left your job and you're all in on it. I've got a family, 5 kids. Like, I'm not going to work every day earning an income. Like, there was a lot of pressure and stress in my life, and it was it was challenging because it felt so perfect. right? Like everything fits so well. And I was still looking at other businesses during this time, right? Because I didn't know if this was going to happen. And so I was still keeping my pipeline going. And I looked at a bunch of other things, but nothing was even close to as good of a fit as this was. And so when the deal died several times, I was devastated. But it was a really important lesson for me. I think also for my kids and for my family. Because by the way, they were stoked about this business too. Like think about being, a 4 to a 13 or 12-year-old kid, which is the age of my kids. I've got five of them in that age. Knowing what Get Out Pass is, seeing all the venues, and be like, wait, that's the business you're gonna buy? Like that's gonna be awesome. So they were stoked. And then when I told them like, hey, it's not gonna happen, and they were just devastated. Like they were crying. Like a few of my kids were crying. They're like, Dad, why didn't it work out? And it
Wow.
was it's a really important moment for me to show my kids, like, hey, you know what? Sometimes things don't work out the way we plan them out to be, but I don't control that. What I control is my reaction. So I want you to see me go back to work the very next minute. Like this was in the morning. I told them, I said, guys, it's not going to work out. It's really sad, but you know what I'm going to do today? I could sit here and wallow and weep in misery, or I could go back and find another business. That's what I'm going to do. And to be honest, like that's what actually got us under LOI is I found another business that was ready. I was ready to close on that or go under LOI on that. And I kind of came back to TC and the group and said, look, guys, like this is the business
Now
I
or
want.
never.
I want to move forward with this, but these guys need an answer. And if we don't do it, I'm going to move in that direction. And that's what got us to finally get under LOI. And so I think to me, that was a really important lesson. Like anyone who's out there searching or looking for the business, like you've got to keep on going. No, you can't get married to one deal because it might not work out. Now, fortunately, it did. But I think part of the reason it worked out here is because they saw like this feels like the right situation for us too. But if we don't do this now, it's going to be gone. Like he's going to go in a different direction. So that part was super important to me, even though it was incredibly hard and an amazing, just a crazy roller coaster going through it because this is what I wanted. This was what I felt was the perfect fit for me and for the business and for my family. And so yeah, that was a rough one. But when I met Mason, when we had that lunch with the three of us, that's when it really felt like, okay, this is what we need to do, right? Because it was like they had capital, they had a business, they needed an operator. I had experience, I was passionate about what this business was and saw what it could become, and I needed capital. And TC had two other partners that all had, differing views of where we should go, but all agreed like now's the time to sell. And they needed both an operator and an investor. And so it's like, I think we realized at that lunch, we had the three components that we all needed to make this happen. This was a win 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 for all three of us. Now we just needed to execute. Now, there's a journey that happened there, but ultimately, at that moment, I think we all walked out of that meeting feeling like this is going to happen. Like we felt confident that Grable was going to make it happen. He gave us enough confidence. Like we want this to happen, and we will execute. I committed to like, hey, I'm going to do this. I'm not going to search for other things. I'm going to go for this. And TC committed like, I'm going to do whatever it takes with my partners to make this happen. And so even though it was hard to get there over the next whatever it was 4 months, the three of us committing at that moment, at least in my mind, felt like this is going to happen.
What a roller coaster, guys. And congrats getting it to the finish line. A deal that died a few times, could have died a few more times, but ultimately the right thing happened. Kyle, bring us to closing day and then tell us a little bit about what the vision ahead was at the time of merging the companies and coming together.
Yeah, I mean, initial that was August, and we were hoping to close like October, right? We ended up
Yeah.
closing on 12/31, so we closed on New Year's Eve, and there was a lot of ups and downs through that period, as with any deal. But ultimately, like we were all at that point, the other two owners as well, they were all ready, right? Like they realized that this was the time. The time was now. This was the right situation and deal. And they also, I mean, I'll let TC speak to this, but they didn't want to go through this again, right? Like if this didn't happen and they had to start from scratch and find a new buyer and go through the whole process, get a broker, whatever the case is, that's another year plus of going through that. And that's very trying for them too. And then on our side too, like I was exhausted, Grable was exhausted. Like we were all ready to make this happen. So yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, it feels like you should celebrate, but it's really more of just like a sigh of relief, like, oh, we finally
We
did
landed
this.
the plane.
But for me, it was different because it was like, yes, sigh of relief, but all of a sudden, someone told me searching for a business like training for a marathon, but then getting it under LOI is like getting to the starting line. And then you finally close it. And it's like, yay, I finished the marathon. Someone walks up to you and says, congratulations, you qualified for the Ironman. You start right now and start running or jump in the pool and swim. And that's how it felt, right? Like all of a sudden this big sigh of relief, but it was like, oh my gosh, now I have two companies. I need to figure out how to bring these together. We need to inform, all the employees, the team, let them know that this has happened. And then they're going to be looking to me for guidance. And what do we do going forward? And by the way, like that feeling of animosity that, TC mentioned, like this is Coke and Pepsi, this is Nike and Reebok or Adidas. Like these guys were not friendly with each other, even though they didn't know each other and hadn't really interacted a lot. I mean, just like, what are those guys at Get Out doing? I can't believe they're doing this. They're coming into our market. How can those guys Pogo like enforcing exclusivity on us? Like it was just, they didn't love each other, but all of a sudden we were all one team. And
Geographically dispersed, right, Kyle?
yeah, so most of the Get Out folks are right here based in Lehigh, and they've got a few people remote. But with Pogo, then it's crazy. But the three founders are actually right here in Utah County, even though they never had a pass in Utah. So their initial pass was in Arizona. They had another big one in Vegas, and they have 10 markets total, but none of those were Utah. And part of that is because Get Out Pass had such a stronghold in Utah. By the time that they were ready to come back to Utah, then Get Out Pass was already here and very strong, and so they never came to Utah. But yeah.
So how do you approach week one? This is that's a great analogy of you just completed a marathon, but yet the hard work now begins. What was week one like? This is like you'd had a lot of great leadership experience, but never at the helm of a company the size that you are uniquely suited to help lead, but also you have to go put two organizations together. Tell us a little bit about how you approached it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, fortunately, I had 9 months to think about it. Right. So it wasn't like all of a sudden I just got thrust into it. And so I had created, exhaustive business plans, and also four different investors had asked all kinds of questions about what was I going to do? How was it going to run? I'd look at different operating systems in terms of like, EOS or, Thrive or, the scaling up method. There's all these things that I'd looked at. And so I had done a lot of thinking about what this first week was going to look like. And, hundreds of podcasts of, Will Smith and all these other people who had stepped into similar. So I had a lot of ideas. It wasn't like I just went in blind, but ultimately I drew on the experience I'd had of, I'd actually, the organizations I'd led at LinkedIn and Gympass have been larger people wise than what we have here. And so I wasn't necessarily intimidated by the size of the group, but it was my first time being, at the helm as the CEO, like the ultimate person. But ultimately, I think the same principle still applied. In my mind, and I learned this at LinkedIn, then, talent is always your top priority. People are always the number one thing, especially in a knowledge-driven business like this, right? Where ultimately our product is delivered by the people who are creating it. And so I really needed to establish relationship with the key members of the team as well as every member of the team. So I actually met before before we announced anything. I met with kind of the core leadership team here at GetOutPass and also at Pogo Pass. We had a few months of transition with the three owners over there at Pogo Pass where they initially weren't excited about this at all. Now they were still part owners in the business. They ultimately, as part of the deal, got bought out completely. And so they agreed to kind of a transition period. And actually, next week is their last week with the business officially. And there's some severance for them. But essentially, they were running the business, right? So I was stepping in for those three, as well as the CEO of GetOutPass. But their transition after they kind of came to an agreement and we had a deal, they became a lot more friendly to the idea. And they are wonderful human beings. I really enjoy working with all three of them. They've been great through the transition, but that was key in kind of getting them on board and establishing trust with them and helping them understand like, hey, my goal is not to destroy anything you created, just to build on it. You guys have an amazing foundation. And so gaining that trust was also helpful. So they made a couple introductions to kind of their three key people. I met some of the key people over here. So prior to the announcement, during those first couple of days, I met one on one with each of those key leaders. Then during that first week, the first day we had a meeting with first the entire Get Out team and announced it to them. We had the former CEO who's departing, one of the owners, who said, "Hey, this is what it is. This is who Kyle is." And so I met here in the office with them. And then the next day, we had a similar meeting with Pogo, which was all online and virtual, where we made the announcement to them. Their three owners were there. They made the announcement, then kind of passed it over to me. I gave a brief introduction. And so from there, it was just meeting one on one with people. and just letting them know, like, hey, here's who I am. This is what I'm about. Like, my goal is to build on what you guys have built. I'm really grateful for all you've done. Right now, I'm just going to be learning from you. There's no major changes right now. You guys keep on operating your businesses separately. And then the next priority was building a leadership team. So pretty quickly, I built a leadership team that had 3 members of the Pogo team and 3 members of the Get Out team. We announced that to the larger team. This is our new leadership team. You know, they will be helping us make all the decisions about what happens and what goes forward. It won't be me, mandating things. It'll be us working together. And so that led to a leadership offsite, to having meetings together where we started to kind of bring the teams together, and they started to realize, like, oh my gosh, these are great people. Like, they were our enemies before, and we thought they were dumb. We thought all these bad things about them. But once you get to know them, like, they're really good human beings, and we really enjoy working with them. And as they started to share that with their respective teams, then was like, oh, they're not the enemy. Like, these are good people who are doing their best to build a business. And once both businesses started to understand the context in which the other company operated, like, these were 3 guys who had, on the Pogo side, 3 guys who had growing families who were all kind of in their teens, and they were optimizing for cash flow, right? And so they weren't trying to grow and expand to all these regions. They were trying to cash flow as much as they could to take care of their families. Whereas on the other side, TC and the team, they were saying, let's grow this thing like crazy. And so they weren't as tight on margins. They weren't trying to pay themselves distribution. They were growing and growing like crazy. And so Pogo saw these guys as growing recklessly, and it's like, how could you ever do this? And Get Out kind of saw these guys as like, they didn't really see the big picture. They weren't trying to grow, where it's like they were just different people optimizing for different things. But once you understand that, and the people inside the businesses understood why they did what they did, it's like, oh, that's a logical decision based on the context that they had.
Did you find though, Kyle, that that difference in pace and goal created two different cultures that now you had to find ways to merge? Will you talk as much as you can about that challenge?
Yeah, it absolutely did. That said, there was some really exciting synergies in terms of the ways that the companies had been built. The most relevant one is the go-to-market motion. So Pogo had gone to market by getting this network of moms who was out there very local in their region, who was going to PTAs and soccer clubs and putting up signs on the free or on the, in their neighborhoods. They're like, hey, buy a Pogo Pass. Or like, hey, PTA, every one of these passes you buy, $5 goes to the PTA. Like, that could never be done by GetOutPass with 12 people operating from Utah in 32 markets. But with Pogo, it was all about that local presence, and they weren't spending anything on digital advertising, right? It was all just these moms who
Wild.
were out there selling, which it was amazing. And it turned out in the markets where they were good, they were really good. They were much larger than the GetOutPass in those markets because they had that local presence, even though GetOut had spent a lot of money on digital marketing in those areas. Now, GetOutPass had done everything with digital marketing and influencers, right? And word of mouth once people got the pass. And that worked, and it was highly scalable, and they could go to a lot of different regions. But bringing these two together is now really exciting because now you can make it easier for these moms to sell because you put a little digital media behind it. And now you can also make it so that we can scale into other markets without necessarily needing that local presence yet, and start something. And then all of a sudden we start to hire the local presence that comes in, and people already know a little bit about what it is, so it's easier for them. So there were a lot of things like
That
that
makes sense.
would be easier. That said, culturally, absolutely there were differences, right? Like,
Sure.
you basically have almost the entire employee base of Pogo, which is close to 100 people if you include this network of kind of sales moms who are 1099s and not officially employees, but basically kind of sales reps. It's basically all women, right? It's all moms who are all spread across all this, all their markets. Whereas Get Out Pass is mostly young professionals, right? It's most of them are in their 20s. They're here in Utah. They're bright. They're ambitious. They want to get out and charge, but none of them are moms. There's a couple moms, but it's like not our target market. It's mostly young males, right? So like you've got a 25-year-old guy who's working with a 40-year-old mom who's been doing this for the last 10 years. And so that cultural element is different, but at the same time, like they've come together so well and they're working together so well and they're learning from each other and they're open to learning.
That's so cool. I would imagine, Kyle, you were having a heyday of just like having studied network aggregators your entire career practically, now being at the helm of a combined entity. What what were some of the levers that you identified as, okay, the deal's done. We're merging teams. We're bringing a leadership team together. You told me about a great offsite you guys had where you kind of emerged with a shared vision and values. But also, I want to talk about like the lever side of what you saw as the 5 year runway and potential ahead. Talk about the strategy and how that all came together.
Yeah, and it's still coming together. We've done a lot of work on strategy. We now have kind of a strategic plan for the year. We're putting in place the measures that will go along with that. But there are a lot of really exciting levers that we can pull in this business. And I think one of the most exciting ones is the way the passes are actually structured. So the way the passes are structured is Pogo, essentially all their passes are $50 passes. And so they have been very, very vigilant about making sure only a certain type of venue falls into that pass because we're not going to charge more than $50. So if you want an expensive amusement park like a lagoon or some water park that's more expensive, they would just say no to it, wouldn't put it on the pass. Whereas Get Out Pass would say, fine, we'll bring it on the pass. We'll just increase the price of the pass because the value is there for the user, right? So you got two different models. Well, as we started to dissect it, we realized like neither one of those is wrong, but we could probably figure out a way to bring these together by creating multiple passes. And so what we're testing right now is basically a three-tier passes. Where you have a bronze, silver, gold. And you have one that's kind of at that $50, but then you have one that's more like the Utah pass. It's around $100, and then you have one that's way cheaper that we're going to call the bronze pass that ends essentially as a 30ish dollar, 25, $30 pass that opens up a entirely new population. Like here in Utah, we've always had $100 pass. If you can't afford, if you got 5 kids, you can't afford 700 and something dollars for passes, you didn't buy this, but you can probably afford, 150 or whatever it ends up being. And so creating those types of passes, we'll see where it turns out. Like we haven't launched it yet, but it's really exciting to think of what that could yield. And then also taking some of the things on the Pogo side, we're now testing some of these, sales and marketing reps who, are these moms who are now in our get out markets. We're now starting to sell get out passes the same way that they sold Pogo passes in their other markets. So could that work in our get out markets? I think so, but we're testing it right now. And so there are several other examples of things like that we're trying, but they hadn't really tried before. And so we'll see how they work.
Oh man, it'll be so fun to watch this unfold because you're right. I completely overlooked. You successfully merged the team, articulated a strategy, but now you have two very different customer bases, very different products you have to pull together. And so it'll be fun as a passive observer to watch this come together. TC, you're not a passive observer, but you're not in the day to day. What are you excited about, and kind of where's your headspace been over the past few months as you've watched this come together and watched Kyle get to work?
Yeah, I mean, it's been exciting. Like Kyle, I think all of my assumptions have been exactly right. That he is like the guy to run this, and the experience that he brings to the table, and he's just so passionate about what it is that we have here. And so I think that's infectious, right? Like I think that's a big reason that these teams can come together is they see Kyle's enthusiasm for what we have going on. So I think that's a big win. And then yeah, just I think over the next couple of years, seeing where it goes of kind of layering on some of these marketing strategies and combining strategies in these different markets to see what that does to potentially exponentialize what we can do in each of these markets. I mean, the mom network thing. I mean, don't underestimate the power of moms. I think we kind of like we always sort of toyed with that, but it was like, boy, that's a major undertaking to kind of get up this market set up. And it was just like with fast growth and thinking like more markets, let's get across the country, let's be kind of first to market in all these different, kind of large territories. The easiest way to do that and the easiest way to scale was digital marketing, digital advertising. And so we spent on that, right? But it's very exciting to have this other kind of aspect of the business that another company has really perfected that would have taken us, you know 3 or 4 years to like learn how to do that in that model, and now it's just a part of our company. So that's been a major unlock, I think, that was kind of assumed, but you never know when you put the things together, like how that's going to look. Does it really make a difference? You just don't have a full look under the hood. But I think everything that we've kind of been discussing has been really positive and like, yeah, that could work really well. Let's put those together. And I'm ultimately excited to see. I think it'll take a couple years, but at some point, I think these two companies will be merged entirely under one umbrella and one brand, and just be kind of the juggernaut in the space. And I think the space is really growing. Like Kyle spoke to. I mean, I was amazed talking with Kyle in the beginning of like Gym Pass, for instance. I mean, the gym market is actually a smaller market than the entertainment industry, than the the family entertainment industry. And you've got these aggregators in the gym market, like Gym Pass, that are doing hundreds of millions and worth 2, 3, 4 billion dollars. You have nothing like that in this family entertainment space as an aggregator.
It
And
seems like
now,
you guys have such a huge opportunity in front of you.
yeah, so we've got a major head start, and we've got multiple marketing avenues and strategies that have kind of been figured out. And now it's just a matter of putting them together. And that's like super exciting to me that we're kind of on the front end of that, and that there's this industry out there in this category that we could really, I mean, we already are the leaders in, but it's really just totally in its infancy. And so that's super exciting. And so for me, I'm on the board myself, Mason from Gray Bull, and Kyle. And so just kind of, watching from a safe but reachable distance has been
Yeah.
really fun to see what Kyle is
It must be
able to do.
it must be so fulfilling to be 8ish years in and yet be at the like starting line again of like what's possible. Kyle, in closing, I mean, this is first of all, congratulations to both of you for getting a very complex deal put together and one that is so accretive for all involved. It sounds this is it's rare that a plane can land in the way that you guys brought it together and touch down in the way that it did. And it's a fun company. It's a great company to call a Utah company, and the opportunity is huge. I think you learn a lot in moments like this in your career. I'm curious, Kyle, and then TC, we'll close with you on a similar question of like, what lessons did you learn along the way, either on the deal making side or in your early days, merging two companies, two cultures, articulating a vision, acquiring a business, and operating? Are there one or two lessons that you'd be willing to share with the audience that you learned in particular in this journey?
Yeah, go ahead, CC.
Yeah, I mean, I've done a fair amount of acquisitions. This one was unique in that there were a lot more parties at play and a lot more people involved, right? You had the original three founders that Kyle talked about in Pogo Pass, and the original three founders in GetOutPass, and kind of getting everybody what they want and need. And the funny thing for me that I learned, and I had never really heard this before, you kind of feel like, the perfect deal is where like everybody's happy. But in this situation, like there was so much compromise that had to be given kind of from everybody and all parties. I remember we got to a point where it's like, deal was about to fall apart again. And Kyle said something like, well, everybody's like just the right amount of frustrated. And I think that means we got ourselves to a good deal, right? Like everyone is kind of like equal amounts feeling like they had to give something up, right? And so that to me was kind of a new thing that I never really thought about. Is like, yeah, you're right. Everybody's kind of a little bit upset right now and a little bit, ticked off to the same degree. That probably means we got a fair deal, right? Where everybody's kind of given something to be able to make this happen where there's so many parties involved. So that would probably be the biggest takeaway from me just in terms of the acquisition. And then as far as running the company, I think, from my perspective, I haven't been actively involved in the business for a long time, and I've been on the board. And just, I think I learned a lot from being a board member and what that entails. In my other businesses, I'm very active and involved in all the daily activities of the business. And I know the financials in and out. And, I'm very in tune with every little thing that's going on. And this is one where I'm more like on the board and get kind of my updates. And I think I've learned a lot about like asking the right questions to make sure we know what's going on within the business so that when the time comes to sell or when the time comes to figure out what the next step is and what strategy we should take, that you can come to the table informed. And I think that's the next step in this process for me is as a board member is to really know more about what's going on in the business and what the basics are and making sure we're keeping those in check so that, when the next time comes to sell or the next step or whatever it is, that we can make better informed decisions.
It's a great perspective. Thank you for sharing that. Kyle, what about you?
Yeah, it's probably three things. I think one is relationships matter. And it's really been fun, exciting, interesting, and a learning experience to see how the relationships that we've been able to build through this entire process, in my mind, is what's been able to keep this all together. There were many times we were ready to walk away, but I think the relationship that we've all had intact of building trust with each other to realize like despite the challenges, despite the nuances, whether it's valuation or networking capital or other aspects of any deal, can be challenging. Ultimately, believing and trusting in the relationship that's been built and the opportunity ahead is what's carried things through. And ultimately, also what makes you want to continue working with people, right? There are people through different processes that you go through something with and realize, like, I'm never going to work with that person again. And so that aspect of the relationship is super important. And then two, I would say optionality is really important. Like understanding that even though building relationships is so important, I touched on this earlier, like creating the optionality to make sure that you don't have all your eggs in one basket, especially if you're in the position I was where you're searching, could put you in a really tough situation. And so that was really helpful to know that there were other options out there. And then finally, what I'll say is enthusiasm and passion are infectious. I think that the feeling that I've had as I've come in and stepped in to help operate this business, I've never been more excited about anything professionally in my life. This is so exciting. But I find that as I share that, then others share my passion, and that feeds me to help me be even more excited about it. And so I'm really grateful and honored to be a part of a business that's so easy to be passionate about. But it was a great reminder to me of how important it is to believe in the mission of what you're doing. And I've been at places in my life, at companies where I didn't have that same passion, but having it now makes all the difference because there's not been a day in the last 3.5 months that I've woken up and not been excited to come to work. Not to say I'm not excited to go home because I'm excited to do both, but to me, that's the definition of happiness: being excited to go to work in the morning and excited to go home at night. So,
Well, guys, a better deal couldn't have come to two better guys. Congratulations on getting it to the finish line. Kyle, we're all rooting for you, both like writing the story of Get Out Pass as a successful Utah company, continuing TC's legacy, and all the founding kind of partners that helped get it there. It's fun to kind of get a glimpse, as I get to see from time to time, behind the scenes of how hard you're working and what you're doing to bring this together. So, and both of you, thank you for jumping on the pod to lift the hood and share the guts of a complex deal. And I know it's not easy to talk about it. So thanks for being vulnerable and thanks for sharing some lessons with folks listening. If anyone wants to get in touch with either of you, how can we do that? And then any final words and we'll wrap up.
you can find me on LinkedIn. And what I will say is thank you, Chase. The work that you're doing for the Utah, kind of ETA and small business community is really inspiring. And I'm really grateful for the community that you've built and the way you continue to invest back into this community. So thanks for all you're doing.
Thanks,
Sincerely.
Kyle.
Yeah. Same thing on LinkedIn, TC Krueger. Thanks, Chase. It's been great. It's kind of funny that we spoke on a panel together, and that night was when I met Kyle at the Jazz game, and you were there. And so yeah, it's kind of cool to see this come full circle. So
Small
anyway,
city, it's a small industry, and it's fun
yeah,
how often things come full circle. And you guys
yeah,
are true gentlemen. It's fun to watch you guys come together, knowing each of you individually, and now watching you guys succeed together. It's fulfilling to see.
yeah. It's awesome. Thanks for putting it together. Appreciate you.